Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, good morning, wherever you are coming from. Thank you for joining today's live stream looking at vice presidential picks. Now, I said I wasn't going to be doing videos for a while, but I guess I should have mentioned that I am still going to do live streams. I still might release a video for next week, but I was talking about taking a 1 week break because doing these videos takes a lot out of me. Now, when it comes to these types of videos, it doesn't take a lot out of me, but I want to make it a lot shorter than the 10 hours that I had before. So, or 10 hours, 3 hours. That shows you how fried my brain is right now. So, we're going to do the vice presidential candidates picks. Now, the criterion, and it seems like, even though I put the disclaimer out before regarding the presidential campaigns, uh, the criteria is not whether they won or not. And I think that people looked at campaigns and elections like, oh, the good campaign or the bad campaigns based on who wins or who loses. And that's not what this is. This is based on certain criteria. So in that last election one that I had in regards to picking the campaigns, it was about which campaign ran the best. So some campaigns won, but the circumstances of a campaign of the election itself made it that they didn't have to run that well. So take, for example, 1964 LBJ. I thought he ran an average campaign because he was going to win anyway. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And the criteria for the vice presidential list here is going to be a little bit different. And just so you know about the video games one that I did, that video did really badly. A lot of times if I have a video that does really badly, I just make it a members only video. I've done that with, I did a video a long time ago about a candidate in Orlando who tried to kill his opponent. So a lot of my poor performing videos, I put into members only because it can kind of mess up with the algorithm. So that's what I did in that case. But in this case, we are going to look at the vice presidential criteria. Now, this one's going to be a little bit different because the reason why somebody might pick a certain vice presidential candidate is could be different, right? So the reason why LBJ was picked was the total opposite reason as to why Al Gore was picked. But they were both really good reasons, even though they were the opposites. So we're going to kind of look at this holistically as to what the vice presidential candidate brought to the ticket. I will admit some of these I won't know as well. So, for example, Ross Perot's 1996 candidate is named Pat Choate, I think it is. Don't know much about him. Okay, so I'm gonna admit, I mean, like he's probably the odd one out. I'll admit, but yeah. So each vice president's gonna have their own criteria that based on what the presidential candidate needs and what the electoral goal is for that campaign. Now, I'm just going to pull up Wikipedia for some of this. So, we're going to start with the 1960 election. The reason why is I made the video about the campaigns and it took 3 hours. I don't want a 3 hour video again. So we're going to start with 1960, go to 2024. I hate going to 2024 because once we start getting 2016 or 2012 to 2024, it goes out of history and people myopically look at everything through a partisan lens, which I hate because I just hate that. But anyways, we'll go through each presidential election just on Wikipedia here, just as a easy guide. So we are going to start with 1960, and we are going to start as we did before: Democrat first, Republican second, Independent third. So LBJ, where do we put him on the list? I mean, LBJ has to be absolutely S tier, right? So LBJ, if you're JFK, you need somebody with experience, who better experience than the master of the Senate. Okay, you need somebody that's going to help you in the South. You need somebody who's going to help you win a state, a key one, which is Texas, you need somebody who is going to provide maybe an ideological difference with some voters that you do not um, like, that you really cannot connect to. So the picking of LBJ was just like a really, really good pick, a really, really smart pick. And I don't know at the time, if we look at other Democrats, if they necessarily were the best picks, because I would say the Senate, I mean, if we're looking at the Senate Democrats at this time, uh, though they had a lot of senators, were really not really well known outside of that. LBJ had a national profile. LBJ could have been the nominee in 1960, but probably wasn't going to be. I mean, it went to Wyoming at the end for Kennedy to win it on the first ballot at the convention. But LBJ is definitely S tier. Covered everything you need. And there's maybe even a little bit of a bonus with LBJ, which is that he could have been someone who took the spotlight. And in the campaign, he really didn't. He really let Kennedy take the spotlight, because we know LBJ likes the spotlight. He played that second role quite well. So we got to give LBJ. So we're starting off with S. You definitely need to put him up there. I see somebody put Alvin Barkley here. I'm about an hour and a half away from Paducah. I've been to his grave, actually. So, and then Lake Barkley, one of the lakes in the land between lakes in Kentucky. So, yeah, so I didn't want to go that far back, just for time reasons. So we do have to put LBJ there. Next one is Henry Cabot Lodge. Now, I'm going to put him at an A tier, because to me, he was a very solid pick. And his pick was kind of, I would say, different than what LBJ was. Whereas LBJ was picked to, help with some deficiencies that JFK might have had, I really see Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. as this complementary ticket, something we'll talk about when we get to Clinton and Gore, right? Somebody who gives a little bit more foreign policy experience, gives a little more, is more known as well. I mean, obviously Nixon was known. He was the vice president for 8 years, but it really had kind of, I don't want to say establishment, but kind of had a strong, secure, safe seat. Now, the one thing I think that Henry Cabot Lodge brings is his foreign policy experience into this race, because if you do look at the campaign in 1960, it was probably one of the most foreign policy heavy campaigns that we've ever seen. We hadn't talked about Vietnam. There was a lot of talk about Quemoy and Matsu, these two islands off the coast of mainland China. I mean, we talk about Taiwan today. Those arguments were happening back then. Obviously, Cuba was a big thing. Soviet Union, Eastern Europe in general. So, and West Berlin, the security of West Berlin. So I think Lodge actually helped Nixon a little bit more when it came to that national security profile. So I think he was very much a good candidate. Again, for what the ticket needs to be balanced, or to do what you can. It's not it's not based on if they won or if they lost. Remember that. It's based on what the campaign needs to do to move ahead. And remember, Nixon was not far from winning that election. A few votes the other way, Nixon would have won. Now, let's go to 64 and let's look at Hubert Humphrey. So, Hubert Humphrey, I would put him in... I would kind of put Hubert Humphrey in a C category, or a B category. And I want to put him in A, but because he does provide a little bit of balance. So LBJ wasn't as strong with, let's say, labor as Hubert Humphrey was. So he definitely provides Hubert Humphrey with the backing of labor. Um, in the past, Hubert Humphrey might have helped with issues of civil rights and all that, but with LBJ passing the 1964 Civil Rights Act and all that and signing that into law, or Congress passing it and he signed it into law, he didn't need that background anymore. He didn't need somebody on that front. So I would say that Hubert Humphrey was mainly there to help, not necessarily bolster support with labor, but just kind of solidifying that labor support. Okay, making sure that they have someone strong. A good New Deal Democrat, which interestingly, like LBJ was not when he was in the Senate. I mean, if you read like Means of Ascent and some of the other books that I have, so I'm on Master of the Senate right now. I need to start reading that again today. He didn't start off as a New Dealer when he was in Congress and when he was in the U.S. Senate. Okay, so Hubert Humphrey gives him that liberal view. And in 64 is really interesting because where 60, we saw a huge focus on foreign policy. We really don't see the foreign policy as a focus at that time. We're looking at social safety nets coming. We're looking at as I mentioned, the Civil Rights Act and the upcoming Voting Rights Act and other things too. So it kind of flipped in the course of 4 years. Sorry. So Humphrey, I think, is a good, solid pick to help with the liberal base, but he didn't need to be there. Okay, the question becomes, could he have picked anyone? I do believe one of the problems that we have with Humphrey, and looking back, in history to Humphrey, I think that one of the problems that the Democrats had, and I hate to say this is a problem that Democrats do have, there was kind of a coronation of Humphrey. There, like with Hillary Clinton and with Joe Biden, there was this, it's their time to be president. Even though, and Humphrey had been on the scene for a while. And by the time that he ran in 68, he was considered, you had him in 72. He was considered in 76. A lot of people go watch my video about Carter's campaign in 1976. I think it's one of the best videos that I've done so far. That and the one, the Kennedy one running for Congress for the first time. I do not know how that's not one of the top performing videos on here, but it isn't. It's like the ones you put the most effort into really digging into the research don't get as many hits as the ones where you do a lot of research, but it's not as deep. So I don't know how that YouTube algorithm works. But I always feel that Humphrey was one of these people who the Democrats thought it should be his time at some time. They tried to push him in 1976 at the last minute to beat Carter at the convention, but Carter had already, he didn't have enough delegates going into the convention. Okay. But then people dropped out and he was able to secure a nominee, but he himself did not. William E. Miller. Now, it's funny because in his later career, William E. Miller was someone who was in I think it must have been the mid 1970s. There would be these American Express commercials, and it was like, who am I? And it would be someone famous who you should know, but you have no idea who they were. William E. Miller ended up being one of those people. Now, of course, he was running with Barry Goldwater. At the time, William E. Miller was both the Republican Party chairman as well as a congressman from New York. Now, he did vote for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which totally went against what Barry Goldwater had done. A balance, but not necessarily a balance that was based on a strategy. So we talk about the Southern strategy, which really starts with Barry Goldwater. And because I think a lot of people, when it comes to Southern strategy, I think a lot of people, for some reason, think that it starts with 72 and Richard Nixon. No, it really started with 64 and Goldwater. And you can tell that. Let's go to our, I forgot to flip over to 64. You can tell that by our Electoral College map here. So this is why I'm saying, okay, the campaign was doomed. The campaign was not going to win or whatever. But was William E. Miller the best candidate to go with Goldwater to try to help him move forward? I don't think so. And I'm going to put this in, I'm not going to put it quite in a D because I think that um, he was a capable person. You already were on a ticket that was doomed to lose anyway. If you look at the last stream that I did about presidential campaigns, Kennedy was going to beat Goldwater by the same amount Johnson ended up beating Goldwater by. So it wasn't like Kennedy died, then Johnson came in, and it had always been the same. Go check out that past live stream. So I think he did everything, but if your campaign strategy is the Southern strategy, and he was with the Southern strategy, but then you pick someone who pick the Voting Rights Act, maybe it wasn't the best. To me, the best pick, he wasn't in politics at the time. He wouldn't have been elected until 2 years later, but he was politically active. If you're going to go with a long shot, I think Ronald Reagan has to be the person you go with if you're Goldwater. But I put him in C. I don't put him in D because you want to realize D, who are the people that are really going to take away? Who are the people that really aren't going to do anything? If you don't cause any harm to the ticket, you're not going to be in this D category. D category, we're going to get into D category in the next election, 1968, okay? D category is really, are you causing harm? Should you not be on here? Are you a bad choice? Okay. All right. So let's go to Spiro Agnew. Actually, no, let's go to Ed Muskie. So 1968, let's go over to the 1968 election and let's look at Ed Muskie. So as you can see, this was a very close election. Not as much in the Electoral College, though. If a state like Texas had flipped, we would have started seeing, we would have seen a lot. We would have seen a lot change. So Texas had to flip. One of the others had to flip in order for it to go to the House of Representatives. So what did Spiro Agnew do? So Spiro Agnew was in 1968 when Rockefeller was running originally. He was either one of his national chairmen or just the chairman in Maryland for Rockefeller's campaign. Okay. So he was a Rockefeller person. Then Rockefeller decided not to run. So Spiro Agnew became one of these people that really connected the Nixon wing, and this whole Nixon Rockefeller wing type of thing had been going on since 1960, right? I mean, it really started in 1960. You got Goldwater in there in 64, but then we're kind of back to the old 1960 type of battle between Nixon and Rockefeller. And so in this situation, you bring in Agnew because he is the person that can actually bring over the Rockefeller people to help you build your coalition to win. Now, you're not going to have a Southern strategy in 68. You got Wallace in the campaign, and he's going to take all those seats or all those electoral votes. So Spiro Agnew is good, but you know what? I'm supposed to be doing Ed Muskie, but we're doing Spiro Agnew now. Okay, I'm supposed to be doing Ed Muskie. So let's go with Spiro Agnew. I'm going to put him, this is where I'm going to put him as a B, because now I'm going to, it's like I want to put him between a B and a C. I'm going to put him in as a B because of what he brought to the ticket, bringing those Rockefeller Republicans over, that being enough to just tilt things in the direction of, of what's going. Okay, by the way, I don't know why I said Texas. If it changed, that would have been okay. So anyone who mentioned that, I'm sorry. My brain still has Republican blue, Democrats red, and I should know from this electoral map that's not the case. The coloring that we did back in 2000 and ended up being like this is absolutely the wrong coloring, and I hate it. So the reason I was thinking about putting Agnew in the C category mostly was my my microphone has problems, please let me know if that's the case. Because I'm not seeing anything on my stream. The only reason why I thought about putting him in C is if they would have done their due diligence and really delved deep into his background, they would have known. And I think nowadays you could find this out. They would have known there was some shady stuff going on. Okay. So, and someone that says Rockefeller would have been a better vice president. There's a point where I don't think that Nixon wanted Nelson to be his VP in 68. Now that had been talked about in 60, but in 68, I think there was maybe Nixon don't want him, but maybe Rockefeller didn't want it either, because remember, Rockefeller refused in 1960. So I think there was enough tension there that possibility might not have happened. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at Ed Muskie. Ed Muskie becomes this up-and-coming senator in the 60s. He becomes well-known. He is from Maine. He's kind of more of a moderate-ish type of candidate. He can speak okay, but I would say his magnetism isn't the greatest in the world. The question at this point becomes, what does he add to the ticket? And I really don't know how much he could have added, but again, he didn't necessarily hurt the ticket either. So he was a bigger name that I really don't think added anything. But at this time, you got to realize that the Democrats are in absolute disarray, right? Because you have Johnson running, then not running, which, by the way, I'm thinking of making a short video about it. The whole Cronkite moment about Nixon saying, if I lost Walter Cronkite, I lost the middle America or whatever. Total myth. It never happened. And as a matter of fact, that quote or anything acknowledging that quote didn't appear in print until 1979. And apparently it was by one of his staff said that he said that. Now, LBJ wasn't even at the White House. They said that in the book that says that LBJ said this, they said that he was at the White House watching it and say, if I lost Cronkite, I lost the average American voter. Okay. He was in Texas. He was at John Connally's birthday that day. And apparently it was an aide that said it. Okay. But we end up finding out, according to how this book was written in the research, that it was basically an Air Force One pilot that heard an aide saying that this other aide saying that LBJ said this. Okay. So it's like a total myth. I mean, it's rare to hear people talk about it, but only a few people have done research into it. And even on West Point's website, they talk about West Point, the Academy for the Army. They even say this is not what happened. So that I think is very interesting. I might do a short video on that. Anyway, yeah, I would put Muskie in a C. Mostly because, whereas these two in the B, they added something to the ticket. Muskie's a good guy. I don't think he really added anything to the ticket. Now, Curtis LeMay is where we do have the D. Remember I said we're going to get to the D really quick? Curtis LeMay is interesting. He was picked. So he was an Air Force, is it a general in the Air Force? I don't know anything. So if you're one of those people that watch the military history channels and stuff like that, vlogging through history, I don't know a damn thing about the military. Okay. Just going to say that right now. I don't know what a colonel or, general, and then you got different types of, I don't know. Are generals in the Air Force? Maybe. I don't know. Admirals are with ships. I know that. Generals are with armies. You're in the air now. Are you an admiral or a general? Are you a sky admiral? I don't know. I'm just saying that. Anyway, Curtis LeMay was, yes, perfect. Curtis LeMay and George Wallace were the definition of a radioactive ticket, literally. So during World War II, he was for firebombing of Japan. He was for just basically leveling the hell out of everything, using nuclear weapons, firebombing Japan, and continuing with just bombs, bombs, bombs. And in his rollout press conference, people knew this, the media knew this, and they rolled him out. And during this press conference, they asked LeMay, they asked him, like, what do you think we should do with Vietnam? Or do you support the use of nuclear weapons? And he didn't necessarily say yes, but it was one of those, like all options are on the table type of thing. So at that point, George Wallace was like, okay, we got to go. We're done for the day, so on and so forth, and then left. Now, who are you going to get to run for George Wallace? Now, if you watch my Utah video that I just saw, Ezra Taft Benson, who eventually became one of the presidents of the LDS Church, he was considered for Wallace, which could have helped him win Utah. But I don't think so, because one of the reasons why Utah stayed with Harry Truman was as a rejection of the Democratic Party still being connected to the segregationist South. So I don't think that would have happened. So yeah, see, anyone that says Walz, or we'll get to Walz here. Highly disagree with you. Shapiro doesn't bring anything to the ticket. Picking someone for a state nowadays, that don't matter. All right, so let's look at 1972. So we have obviously we have Spiro Agnew here. I'm keeping him in B for now because it was 1972. And you'll see I only had the vice presidential candidates once. So like if they became vice president and ran for re-election, I'm just keeping them there. So we have Thomas Eagleton, right? This, I'll have to put him in a D category. Though I don't know if I can necessarily see, to me, even if John, we'll get to Shapiro. We'll get to, that's our last one. But when it came to Eagleton, to me, so it's kind of interesting. So he was picked because he was a moderate on the ticket, teaming up with McGovern, who was a pretty liberal person, but not very charismatic and whatnot, just not the best candidate. So the reason why I have Eagleton down there is he did not disclose his health situation. So he had been seeking counseling for depression. I don't know. So they said he went through electroshock therapy. I don't know if that actually was true or not, but the Republicans talked about how he went through electroshock therapy and all that. So he did not disclose that to the McGovern campaign. He also said he also said when McGovern was picked or looked like he was going to be the pick for the campaign, he said to Bob Novak, saying, oh, McGovern's a horrible choice. If McGovern's going to win, he's only about abortion, helping draft dodgers, and like all these other liberal things. He's not going to win. So like he really didn't even like McGovern and the possibility of McGovern being on the ticket. Him being kicked off the ticket was probably a good thing, but I put him in D because he just did not disclose things. He did not help the ticket. It was a bad situation. Now let's look at Sargent Shriver. So you obviously get rid of Eagleton. You need to get somebody else on there quick. Sargent Shriver was there, and I'm going to give him a C. He definitely, and see what I'm talking about with the D tier. The D tier are those people who actually hurt your ticket. Okay. The C is kind of like, The B, you get a little bit from that ticket. The A, you have a strong ticket there. And the S is top notch. So the only thing that Sargent Shriver actually brought to the McGovern ticket is that Camelot name, the Kennedy connection. I mean, he himself wasn't a Kennedy. He was married to a Kennedy, but that's about all that Sargent Shriver brought to the ticket. Now, one of the things you got to realize is that a lot of people just did not want to run with George McGovern, just like a lot of people did not want to run with Barry Goldwater. So it was slim pickings. And if you're a Democrat in the Senate or a Democrat in the House, you just wanted to keep your seat. So, yeah, so I put him there. There's not much really to say about him. Now, let's go to 76. So we have Walter Mondale. And Walter Mondale, I'm going to go ahead and put in the C category again because I didn't see him as he had been a senator for 12 years. He was more of a moderate senator. He was more of a business type senator. So if we want to talk about the Democratic Party moving toward corporatism, DLC, Blue Dog Democrats, and all that, didn't start in the 1990s or the DLC in the 1980s, mid 1980s, like a lot of people think, really did start with people like Walter Mondale back in the early 1970s and mid 1970s. So I would say he wasn't necessarily extremely well known. He did become well known a little bit because he was involved with the investigation into the Apollo 1 accident, which Grissom, Chaffee, and White were killed in the Apollo 1 tragedy in 1967, I think. What's interesting about American space travel, it seems like all the tragedies that we've had, so it was in January, I think, the Apollo tragedy, and then January 28th, the space shuttle, and then Space Shuttle Challenger, and then I think Columbia was February 3rd. They're all like within a few weeks of each other, all of those tragedies. Just don't launch a spaceship during late January, early February. But he got known for that. And so people did know him for that. But again, what did he bring to the ticket? To me, he didn't bring anything. The headliner was Jimmy Carter, and people talking about him. So I don't think he added any moderating tone. He didn't provide any type of state, which, by the way, you notice one thing I'm not saying. I said it with LBJ, but I didn't say it with anyone else. Notice I'm not talking about states. This vice president can deliver to a state. We'll talk about it with a few. But I find that is really way more of a myth than reality. Okay, we rarely see vice presidential candidates bring home a state, and there's a lot of the times, a lot of the vice presidential candidates usually come from states that party is either going to already win or already lose. Okay, Walter Mondale was in that position. It was basically a state that looked like the Democrats were going to win it anyway. So I don't think Mondale brought anything, and we'll put Bob Dole into that same category. Bob Dole, again, accompanied Ford, trying to get some support in middle America. But one of the problems was that when he would debate and say things, he would kind of come off as like very arrogant and rude. And it actually looked worse than better. But the question is, and we really got to look at the 76 election. Oh, let's go over to Wikipedia. Sorry about that. Got to look at the 76 election, which is a very close election. So you can see the Electoral College, 297 to 240. You see the popular vote. The question you have to ask yourself is, if Walter Mondale or Bob Dole had been removed and we're only voting for president, would there have actually been any change whatsoever in the results? I say no. Like, unlike Kennedy, who brought on Johnson, who I do think helped him, and might have helped him in some shady ways in Texas. Now, the whole, dead voters in Chicago and Daley stuff, that's a myth. That's a Republican myth that's been perpetuated throughout the years because, it's just been a myth. However, we do have evidence in Texas, especially Duca Duval and all that in the 1948 Senate race. I did a video on that already. There could have been some shenanigans going on in Texas. But the question we have to ask here, if Dole or Mondale had not been on the ticket, would that Electoral College total and that popular vote total have been the same? Yes. I don't think there would have been any type of difference whatsoever. So I don't think that he had, like I said some stuff that was pretty rough and harsh, but I don't know if that had an impact at the end. All right. so now we move to 1980. So obviously we have Walter Mondale. He's now vice president. Nothing huge there. Now we have George Bush. Now, with George Bush, I'm going to put him in the B category because I do believe the Reagan campaign really running on national security, and George Bush, with the former CIA background and all that, gave Reagan more of a boost when it came to national security. So I do think that he helped there. Overall, when he was in the campaign, he didn't do anything wrong in the campaign. As a matter of fact, I'd say the way he ran, his sorry, I have some bug. It's getting hot out here, so bugs are all flying into the house. I would say overall, he brought some lack of what Reagan had. So he wanted to have a strong national security background. Bush brought that to a certain extent. As far as campaigning, Bush wasn't the greatest campaigner. He wasn't the best, on the stump speaker. He wasn't going to bring much as far as that. Obviously, as I mentioned, here's another example. When you say, what is George, Bush's home state? Yes, he ran in Texas, but a lot of people consider him from Connecticut. He doesn't necessarily act like a Texan. As a matter of fact, if we look at George W. Bush, I think he might have been born in Connecticut too, but he acts like a Texan. Or he wasn't born in Texas, yet Jeb Bush, who literally was born in Texas, ran for governor in Florida, right? So with the Bushes, sometimes, I guess not the sons, but the home state aspect doesn't really fit in there. So I do believe that Bush actually contributed a lot. So let's go ahead and go to the 80. Now, would it have mattered? I guess maybe not. But obviously, Bush was a candidate running against Ronald Reagan in the primary, so therefore he did have name recognition, and that did help a lot. All right, so let's go to we have Patrick Lucy here. So we have John Anderson's independent run with the U.S. Senate, or the former governor of Wisconsin, Patrick Lucy here. I'm going to put him as I'm going to put him as a C, because honestly, it's just one of those ones that the campaign was running on on Anderson anyway. So he was a governor. He was a governor known for Democratic governor. He was a governor known for good governance, being able to get the University of Wisconsin university system and consolidate it and make it much better and more efficient as well. He was just known as a governor providing good governance. But again, would he have mattered? You know what? I'm going to put him at B, because he actually was a good candidate. It's just, you're running a third party campaign against an incumbent president and a big time challenge from Ronald Reagan. It was going to be hard to find any space in that campaign. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the next one. So we do have Geraldine Ferraro. So we keep Bush there. We have Geraldine Ferraro. To me, she's a C tier. She didn't hurt. The Democrats knew they were going to lose. They said, you know what? Let's just throw the dice. Let's just see what it's like to run a woman for vice president. Unfortunately, she happened to be on a ticket that got absolutely destroyed, definitely in the Electoral College. So, yeah, if we go over to 1984, let's just go here so you have some reference. You can see it wasn't as, Reagan won more as far as the Electoral College. Johnson had a bigger popular vote landslide. But anyways, she was a congresswoman from New York. She was known. People knew who she was. But she didn't bring anything to the ticket. This goes back to what I say, home state doesn't matter. They pick somebody from New York, a state that the Democrats were going to lose anyway, because they were going to lose every state except Minnesota. It didn't really matter who you were going to pick in 1984. And another reason why you had Geraldine Ferraro is that other candidates knew that it was going in the wrong direction. A lot of other candidates ran for the Democratic nomination. They were not fans of Walter Mondale. Again, as I mentioned with the Democratic Party, and this is a huge problem with the Democratic Party, it was seen as another coronation. Okay, coronating Walter Mondale being the former vice president. So a lot of Democrats didn't want to risk being on the ticket and losing their careers. Now, at this time, you didn't really have resign to run laws in a lot of states. Okay, so but you did have laws that say you could only be in one position on the ballot. So Texas changed the law for LBJ in 1960. So he ran for Senate and ran for president. But in most states, it's like if you're going to run for vice president, he ran for vice president, not president. But if you're going to run for vice president, you have to give up. You can't run for the U.S. Senate. Okay. So a lot of senators were up for reelection. They weren't going to lose that. She just became the person that was the choice. And again, I don't think she hurt, but I don't think she helped. Now let's move to 1998. So we have now this is where I'm going to really talk about the result does not matter. The whole thing we're asking ourselves is if the campaign, if picking this certain person helped a lot. And Lloyd Bentsen is like the perfect example. I'm not going to put him at S tier because they didn't win, maybe. And that's kind of going against my own rules, but I'll put him, he's definitely a strong senator, an important senator, a senator who had made runs for president in the past. In 1976, though, was a very failed run. He did run nonetheless, but he was known nationwide. He had a strong presence. He had great composure. He knew how to debate, as we saw in the vice presidential debates. You know, sir, you're no Jack Kennedy, right? So it doesn't matter. And I need to find it because there was a poll, and I don't know if it was a nationwide poll. I don't know if it was done in Texas. They said, who would you vote for? Would you vote for Bush or Dukakis? Or they said like Bush, Quayle, Dukakis, Bentsen. Okay. And the numbers were closer. But when they just said Dukakis and Bush, there was like a huge gap. And then they even asked if Bentsen was the candidate leading the ticket, who would you win? Like Bentsen was ahead. So Bentsen actually, because no, I can't do that. He's got to be an S tier. He's got to be an S tier because he was everything that you wanted in a candidate. It was Michael Dukakis screwing up multiple times in his campaign, screwing up multiple times that ended up making them lose it. But we're talking about the pick for the vice presidency. And you got to put him there because he was a complete package. He was really a good compliment to Michael Dukakis, because you got to remember, what do we have here? We have two moderate Texans running as the vice president for two people from Massachusetts. Okay. They're trying to replicate that Kennedy 1960 thing. Now, this again shows picking somebody from a state doesn't matter, but he was a complete package. He really was. So yeah. Now, Dan Quayle, I'm going to put him on the C list, and I do have some other reasons why. Now, Dan Quayle, see, because I'm putting him in a C because he was a gaffe machine, but I don't, and we're talking about when he was the vice presidential candidate in 88, and then eventually the vice president and vice presidential candidate in 92. He was a gaffe machine. When they picked Dan Quayle, no one was expecting Dan Quayle to come. It wasn't until like the first few days, or a few days before the convention, all of a sudden Dan Quayle's name came up, and they're like, why Dan Quayle? So Dan Quayle, they wanted to get someone who was young, who looked good, and stuff like that. That's what they were going for. It's funny because the Democrats went for the total opposite, and I think Democrats did well here. But obviously, when he was vice president, he had his gaffe, he had his potato-y issue and stuff like that. But it's more like he was more of a clumsy twit than he necessarily was detrimental to George Bush. George Bush did not lose in 1992 because of Dan Quayle. But I do want to mention something. So I pulled up a list of senators from the Congress. Now, there are obviously governors and representatives, but I'm pulling up a list of senators, that maybe the Republicans could have picked instead of Dan Quayle. Okay. I mean, at the end in 88, it didn't hurt because they ended up winning. But who do they have? All right, so let's go ahead and look at this list. So you had Ted Stevens. I think he would have been a good pick. You got Bob Dole, but you wouldn't go that way. Bob Packwood, I mean, he would eventually have his problems, which nowadays you look at Donald Trump, you're like, problems? What problems? Anyways, Bob Packwood would have been a good choice. You have Lowell Weicker, okay. Pete Domenici, he would have been a decent choice as well. Jake Garn, who at this time had already gone into space, senator from Utah, he would have been a strong choice. John Danforth would have been an excellent choice for, if you had Bush Danforth 88, they probably would have never been behind the Democrats. Okay. If you had Danforth known right off the bat, John Chafee, more liberal. I don't think they'd go that way. Danforth is definitely that moderate in the middle. Here's another missed opportunity. And you kind of wonder how history would have changed. What about John Hines? What if he would have been the nominee? I think he was a good, strong, moderate businessman, senator from Pennsylvania. If he had run for vice president, he'd still be alive today, right? Because he ended up dying in a plane crash in 1991 or 1990. Harris Wofford ended up replacing him, getting reelected in a shock bid in a special election, which was kind of the precursor to us knowing that the Democrats were going to maybe do well in the next elections. But John Hines would have been to me, that's the best pick, John Hines. And you got the name, Heinz Ketchup. Nancy, if you wanted to go with a woman, Nancy Kasselbaum would have been a really good choice. Center right candidate from Kansas, she would have been really, really strong. Rudy Boschwitz. Now, I am thinking about doing a whole entire video. I have not done a candidate-centric video yet. I am thinking about doing one on Paul Wellstone. And I have to really amend I always say I have three favorite politicians. I have René Lévesque in Canada, Jack Layton in Canada, and Bob Hawke in Australia. But I got to put Paul Wellstone on that list as well. His commercial against Rudy Boschwitz. If you haven't seen, just put Paul Wellstone, Rudy Boschwitz commercial. If you haven't seen that one, it is friggin' hysterical. And to me, is the best campaign commercial of all time. Bar none. It's the best. William Cohen, that would have been another huge, and William Cohen by this time was known, okay? Even though he had only been in the Senate for 11 years? 11 years is decent. So William Cohen would have been a good one. And then let's get down here. He picked Dan Quayle, of course. Arlen Specter, maybe a little bit more moderate. Don Nichols from Oklahoma. That would have been a good choice as well. In fact, Don Nichols, I think, is essentially the same age. I don't know if that doesn't show the age. He's basically the same age. And good looking young guy. They could have picked Don Nichols as well. A little bit more conservative and whatnot. Pete Wilson. Okay, Pete Wilson from California, moderate Republican, easily could have done well. And then you have, if you want to look at the if you wanted to counter Benson and you wanted the Democrat who became a Republican, Phil Gramm would have been your choice, right? So to me, I put Dan Quayle here because he doesn't necessarily hurt the ticket, even with his gaffes, but there were just so many other extremely good choices. I mean, I look back at it, I think John Hines would have been the one choice. And again, imagine what history would have been like if Hines would have been the vice presidential candidate and went on to win that position. He'd be alive today probably. The only problem is we'd have to deal with Teresa Heinz Kerry. Wouldn't become Teresa Heinz Kerry. She would have stayed Teresa Heinz, but we would have still had to deal with her. And oh my God, during the 2004 election, she was so annoying. Okay, let's go to okay. So that was 1990 or 1988, 1992. Now let's go to I see someone mention Connolly. Yeah, I didn't get into the governors. I was just like, what other senators could you pick? Let's get into 1992. So we have Al Gore. Al Gore, definitely NDS. So the interesting thing with Al Gore is he did exactly the opposite of what Kennedy did with LBJ, what Clinton did. The Democratic Party was trying to rebuild itself in this DLC mode, and you had Bill Clinton part of that. If they would have picked somebody more moderate or even more conservative, because you still did have some conservative Democrats at that time, someone like a Richard Shelby was a Democrat at that time still. Richard Shelby or somebody, Billy Tozen, congressman from Louisiana or something like that. If you want that conservative, I think it would have hurt you with more liberal voters. Al Gore had already run for president. He was a U.S. senator. His father, Albert Gore Sr., was one of the most progressive senators. If you want to look at when the progressive movement started in the South, really look at Al Gore and Estes Kefauver of the Tennessee delegation. That's really where it started. Far cry from what we have now at Marsha Blackburn, and I don't even know who the other senator is, because that's the thing about senators now. There's so many of them that just do not have personalities. I'll just hear a name like, oh, who is that? Oh, it's a U.S. senator. It's bad. It's become so partisan. Like, we used to vote for people on their personalities. Now we're voting on, purely on if they have a D or an R next to their name, and they can just be the, wettest barrel of paint out there. But Al Gore he reinforces what Bill Clinton is: young, bright. He's weird. He was charismatic yet stiff at the same time. Okay, maybe not charismatic. Maybe I'm going a little bit. He wasn't Bill Clinton. But he reinforced that idea that the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of Mondale or McGovern or Dukakis. We are a new Democratic Party, the New Democrats. We are this DLC New Democratic Party. And, the way we're going to show that is by picking someone like Al Gore, who absolutely accompanies him. Now, there could have been a few others that could have been picked. John Bureau of Louisiana could have been picked. I think you want to pick Dale Bumpers because he's from Arkansas as well. Sam Nunn could have been picked as well from Georgia. And this again shows that you don't pick somebody based on their state. We have two people from neighboring states as well, but they really accompanied each other very, very well. So again, we're not talking about him running as a presidential candidate or whatever. We're talking about him as a vice presidential candidate. Was he the best? How much did he contribute to the ticket? And he contributed a lot because when I was working in campaigns in 1992, you saw in a lot of situations when we had the candidates coming down to Florida, coming down to Orlando. One time I had to, and it's where I got my, wherever my Kennedy book is. I got my Al Gore book right here. So I got the book right here, and I got his former wife to actually write it because he wasn't able to make it to the event. So if you've seen I have a book from Bill Clinton up here that I got them to autograph, but then he ended up going to an event in Titusville. So they use Al Gore as much as they use Bill Clinton going around the state of Florida. So he was a huge draw. Great. Now, I know you're waiting for this one. James Stockdale. And he might not be he might be in a position where you don't expect him to be. No, he's not S. Um and it's like he's not D. I truly believe that there's some should he have been the vice presidential candidate? Probably not. Because he was somebody who and I'm seeing the comments, he is somebody who shouldn't be on a debate stage. And that is absolutely obvious when you see him in the debate. But he was a good person. And if you want to talk about doing what Gore and Clinton did, trying to find the person that best represents your views and say, together we represent these ideas, he actually was a really good person. He worked with Ross Perot to try to bring POWs and the bodies of those killed in action, all that from Vietnam, back to the United States. He was a really, really good, nice, strong person, Congressional Medal of Honor winner. So that helps as well. I'm gonna put him in the B. And actually, if you go back to the vice presidential debate, with the exception of what SNL did, which is funny in that intro that he did, which they mocked, he wasn't the greatest, but he wasn't as bad. I mean, if you had James Stockdale against Donald Trump, James Stockdale would probably hold his own. Okay. Trump goes everywhere because, well, I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, he actually, I think, was a good person, just in the wrong place. He accompanied the ticket well. He could have brought military people over to that side. It's just, I think that he was targeted a little bit unfairly. And it really wasn't a target. It was just like that one debate performance. Had that vice presidential debate never have happened, I don't think I think he could have actually had a little bit of help. So I think he was a good candidate for a third party battle that was an uphill battle. So that's where I put him. Let's go to 1996 and Jack Kemp. Now, I've said in a live stream before that I think Jack Kemp was the best, one of the best all-time picks. I'm revising that. I'm going to put, I think that Kemp is a B tier. Okay. Because you had Bob Dole as the candidate. We haven't gone through this. So let me, let's get to 1996. Okay. I mean, Bill Clinton almost won a majority of the overall popular votes, right? One more electoral votes. Lost a few states. Like I said, he lost Georgia. I mentioned that before. He lost Montana as well. Montana was like the big surprise state that Clinton won in 1992. I remember that on election night. But anyways, Jack Kemp was probably one of the highest profile Republicans that were not part of the real Contract with America movement. You did have the Newt Gingrich Contract with America movement, but then you had Jack Kemp, who was much more moderate. He was into these concepts called enterprise zones, where you'd invest in poor communities and all that. He was progressive on a number of things too. So he definitely did not come from that ilk of Newt Gingrich and Bob Livingston, if you remember him. There was a congressman named Bob Walker as well. If for those of you who remember C-SPAN back in the early 90s, these names might, ring a bell. But to me, he really brought, I think, some economic strength to the ticket that maybe would help win some former moderate Republicans who had gone over to Clinton. The problem was the economy was good. And those moderate Republicans, they were staying with Clinton. So this is the reason why Clinton did a little bit better, especially in the suburbs, right? He'd lose in rural areas. One of the reasons he lost, Georgia and other places, but he would do well in the suburbs. So he improved in places like Orlando and others. So, and as you can see, sorry, Bill Clinton won the state of Florida. A lot of that win was Orlando, suburbs of Orlando, places in and around Pinellas County, and so on. So they were trying to use a vice presidential tactic to attack the strength of the presidential candidates, which I think might have been a mistake. Okay. But they were trying to get in there. So I think he was an overall good candidate, but I'm not going to put him into these tiers. Now, I think his name's Pat Choate. Yeah. Do not know anything about this guy except that like he was a college professor. I think he was for balanced budgets and stuff like that. We got to put him in a C tier. I hope that I can add, because C tier might get big. All right, so now we get to 2000. So Joe Lieberman. All right, we're going to kind of do what we did with Dan Quayle. I think Lieberman is in the C category. Can we wait? That's not. Oh, crap. Did I just totally screw things up? Okay. There we go. I'm trying to make it a little bit bigger. I don't know if I can make the rows bigger, if it'll automatically just expand, because it seems like there's a lot of people in the C. Lieberman, no. So the question was, why did you pick Lieberman? Now, the view is that Lieberman was a moderate, so that had a lot to do with it, who was going to win Jewish votes in Florida. Okay? If that was your case, most of those Jewish voters in Century Village, places like Palm Beach County, Boca Raton, northern part of Broward County, they were probably already going to vote for the Democratic ticket anyway, and they were talking about there being an influx, higher turnouts because of that. If you wanted to win Florida, just pick Bob Graham. That was like that to me is still the dumbest. So I can't blame him, but I think that Lieberman was a dumb choice when it came to vice presidential candidates. And I think, is this the list? Oh no, wait. Okay. Oops. Okay. Yeah, I thought that I had a list of senators here, but I don't. But yeah, I would have gone with Bob Graham. If you really want to win Florida, if Bob Graham would have been on the ticket, then Al Gore would have been president. Because, the Democrats are so focused on winning these few precincts down in Palm Beach County, when if you had Bob Graham, you would have won in so many other places, it would have offset what those are. But that's not against. So it was a bad choice. Was it detrimental to the ticket? No. There were just a lot better choices out there that they could have picked. And I think Bob Graham running as the vice presidential candidate is one of the biggest missed opportunities that the Democrats had. Imagine how different things would have been if that would have happened as well. So yeah, I put Lieberman here. I can't blame him, but the campaign made a bad choice. Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, I'm going to put in B, and you might not like this, but I'm going to put him in B. And the reason why is, again, now, I think our opinion of Dick Cheney now, and it depends on, I don't know how old you are watching the video, okay? The opinion that we have of Dick Cheney now was not the opinion that we had of Dick Cheney in 2000. Okay, it's been totally changed. So we got to do everything within the context of that campaign, that election. All right. So you have George Bush, who is a governor. Already have questions about him dodging the draft, him being a member of the Texas Air National Guard, not really showing up and doing things. Okay. Not to say that Dick Cheney was, a Medal of Honor Vietnam veteran, but because of how he was Secretary of Defense during the Persian Gulf War, a lot of people saw him as being strong as far as foreign policy, military, and so on. So he did fill a niche that George W. Bush, needed to have filled. And it's so weird because we're talking about George W. Bush. If we look at his dad actually did the same thing for Ronald Reagan. So in this situation, I would say that that's the case. Now, again, Tom Ridge, to me, so I saw someone mention Tom Ridge. He really wasn't known for national security stuff because he was governor of Pennsylvania, really wasn't known for that until after September 11th and becoming, involved with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and all that. So we got to keep it within the time frame of 2000. 2004, maybe they could have picked somebody like Tom Ridge. Okay, maybe they could have picked some other person to run. But at the end of the day, it didn't hurt them. They went with Cheney, and they still beat Kerry and Edwards, who is next on the list. So I do think Cheney's experience, being in Congress, being in the Republican Party circles and all that, did help. Okay, we have to look at it within the context of that election. All right, now let's look at John Edwards. John Edwards, I'm going to put, it sucks, I'm going to put him in an A. Now, might be a bias because I worked for him in 2004 and 2008. So if you're going to yell bias, okay, you can. So I think Colin Powell's stock went down. So I see someone mention Colin Powell. I think Colin Powell's stock went down after him having that, saying, oh, this is what's happening in Iraq, doing his speeches in front of the UN, and then finding out all that was BS. He could have still run in 2004, maybe, but after that, I think that kind of tarnished him. Of course, that's questionable. I put John Edwards at A. Why? Because again, we're talking about somebody who can help benefit the ticket in a lot of ways. So you are looking at a young, vibrant, moderate, Southern U.S. senator who has legal experience, who knows how to speak, who knows how to debate, who knows how to get voters on his side, who won an election that he wasn't expected to win when he was running in North Carolina, maybe lacked the experience, but it didn't matter. John Kerry did have the experience. So I would put him as a complete candidate, but just a little bit less on the experience. Okay. So I do think John Edwards did well. Now, of course, we know John Edwards afterwards. We know John Edwards as cheating on his wife who had cancer, left, and did all that bad stuff, right? And he's still now practicing law there. But what the Kerry campaign needed at that time to go against George Bush, this was kind of how the election was back in 2000, or 2004. So we're talking about elections, and I know I worked in and all that. Dean wasn't going to be a good candidate, too liberal. I don't even remember many of the candidates that ran in 2004, because I think you had Kucinich run, because I know a lot in 2008, but I forgot a lot of 2004. But yeah, of those people who wanted to be vice president, he would have been one of the best choices. And again, he was very charismatic, very good looking. He had everything that was needed. And again, he helped bring a lot to the ticket. As with Lloyd Bentsen and Michael Dukakis, it was John Kerry who shot himself in the foot. Like, literally, not literally. So I don't know. So there is a clip of this one. It was, this was when the conservatives were starting to get a little bit, you could start seeing the craziness come out. There was a conservative talk person. She was on Hardball with Chris Matthews, and she accused John Kerry of shooting himself in the foot or shooting himself in order to get these medals that he got. And okay, yes, thank you. Now you're helping me. So Wesley Clark, I think, would have been good as well, especially on national security. So I like John Edwards a lot, but I think Wesley Clark could have, if he would have been there, Kerry could have won, and he could have been in the S tier. So Gephardt, I don't think Gephardt was known as being pro-life in his early congressional career until quite late. I think that would have killed him with the base. Um, so yeah, there was somebody that said Kerry. I forgot what her name was, but she said like John Kerry shot himself, and then Chris Matthews did his like ha type of laugh. He's like, "You're really saying that?" Chris Matthews has some interesting, and I think it was 2004 or was it 2008 where Zell Miller challenged him to a duel. I think that was 2008. Might have been 2004, but anyway, yeah, so like crazy stuff was going on like this. You had the windsurfing commercial. You had if you want to talk about a quote that killed people, which I still need to make that video about the top 15 quote, or not top 15 quotes, at least 15 quotes that sunk a campaign. I was for the Iraq war funding before I was against it. That hurt. The Swift boat stuff hurt as well. But, and the question is, does the Swift boat stuff hurt more, or did that quote hurt more, the flip-flopping quote? I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, because I think there are a lot of people with Swift boat, because again, I was around during this time. I was working. A lot of people saw that as some attack BS garbage, but then a lot of people saw it as, oh, look what happened. And I think that just solidified bases. Whereas when you talk about him flip-flopping on stuff, that affects more moderate voters. All right, so we're done with Michelle Malkin. That's her name, Michelle Malkin. That's it. Yes, thank you. You got to watch that. But it was so funny. All right, so we go to Joe Biden. Now, you're Barack Obama. You're the first African-American candidate to have been nominated by a major party for the office of presidency. So what do you need to do to try to win? You need to try to get a good establishment, moderate white guy in there in order to do that. Now, this again, we got to look at the context of the time. Okay. Joe Biden 2008, he was sharp. He was on it. He was witty. And this is, I think, because I was very much one of those people early on in 2023, 2022, saying Biden, he's too old to run. And it's a shame because he was really witty, snarky, and all of that. He really did give Obama, he did compliment him well. So it was kind of a yin and a yang here that created a whole circle. It was the opposite of what you saw with Al Gore. So he gave him a few things: being older, because Obama was younger; experienced, Obama was not that experienced. He'd say it. White guy, Obama was not a white guy. Both being U.S. senators. Being kind of bombastic, I think his personality went well. I know people don't, as far as picking who to pick to be your vice presidential candidate. And I'll tell you one thing. Okay, let me tell you one thing, and then I'll go ahead and put him in there. Evan Bayh. I met Evan Bayh. I met him in Indiana. The Young Democrats of America had their national convention in Maryville, Indiana in 1993. I think it was. I think it was a year after the election. You can look that up. Maryville, Indiana, Young Democrats of America convention. I don't know if it was 93 or 94. I think it was 93. I met Evan Bayh. He was really nice guy. Just no personality. No personality. You need personality if you're running for president, I think. You might be able to pull off no personality when it comes to running in a state. This is the reason why I think Andy Beshear would not do well on a national ticket. He just really doesn't have a personality. That works in Kentucky, but I don't think it works in like other states. But yeah, so we were at the Jefferson Jackson dinner in 2008. And in Nevada, in Las Vegas. It was at the Paris Hotel, I think. Yeah, it was at the Paris Hotel. And would that have been in 2008 or 2007? Because it would have been before the election. Because it would have been March, or I think it was 2007. It was the Jefferson Jackson dinner, which is an annual Democratic dinner. A lot of them have now been renamed the Kennedy King dinner. Some of them keep the Jefferson Jackson dinner going on, so on. But anyway, Joe Biden was on stage. So all the candidates were speaking. And Joe Biden's on a stage. Now we're in the back. I'm at an Edwards table. So everyone around us are members of the Edwards campaign from Nevada, right? So I was working in Nevada at the time. We're all listening to Joe Biden, and every one of us, because he was a great speech giver. Maybe he stole a little bit from Neil Kinnock, but he was a great speech giver. And we were listening to him, and everyone around the table, we all said the same thing at the same time. How is this guy not leading the primary? Now, obviously, it was the coronation of Hillary Clinton versus the person who was trying to stop that coronation, Barack Obama. They sucked all the oxygen out of the room, and it really sucked for us because we were thinking on the Edwards campaign, we have a really good chance. But as soon as those two took the headlines, it was over. But we all were sitting there going, why is this guy not the president? Like, why is he should, like, listening to him, he should be beating everyone. He easily always gave the best speeches. So I'm putting him as an S. A lot of people might not agree with that, but I'm going to go ahead and put him as an S. Sarah Palin. Now, this one might shock you a little bit. I am going to go with A. And you might not expect that. Again, Sarah Palin is, a lot of people think that Sarah Palin's a kook or whatever, right? Her being who she was, how she spoke, her views on the issues, how she came across, won a group of voters that the Republicans were worried about losing. And I've said this in my video about Alaska. If you haven't watched that video about Alaska, go ahead and watch that. I've always considered that Sarah Palin, the linking between the Barry Goldwater conservatism and the MAGA movement that we have now, that Sarah Palin was what connected those two movements together. So she was very important in the transition of the Republican Party to this time. McCain couldn't fill crowds. Sarah Palin could. That election, if they would have picked some milquetoast, typical business Republican, Mitt Romney, who would run 4 years later, they would have picked Mitt Romney, I think McCain would have lost by more. Sarah Palin energized a group of voters that had not been energized since probably Ronald Reagan ran in maybe even 1980, probably 84. Yeah, I'll go with 84. So as much as people might not like her or do like her or whatever, and I think now, like, and we can't, and again, we have to separate what she brought to the ticket in Election Day from everything after Election Day, because then she had scandals in Alaska. Then she, just abruptly decided not to run for governor. Then she kind of fell by the wayside. She kind of just went into obscurity. But at that time, and it was so funny, and it might even be number one still. At that time, when Sarah Palin was announced, Wikipedia, which we still haven't gone through our Wikipedia ones here. So let's just get to our election. But I'm assuming most of you, if you're watching this, you already know the election results and stuff like that. I think on Wikipedia, Sarah Palin was the most searched thing on Wikipedia of all time for like quite a while. I don't know if anything has broken that yet, but like Sarah Palin was definitely like that. But you got to give her credit. She brought something to that ticket. So if we're asking, hey, we're John McCain, what's going to be the game change, right? The game change, have you seen the movie or read the book? The game change, she was. And it turned off a lot of people. And the question is, net-wise, did it energize a lot of people compared to turning off a lot of people? I think it energized more people than it turned off. Because, again, I was in Florida at the time. And Sarah Palin went to the Villages because, of course. And it was really Sarah Palin in 2008 that the Villages really came out for a candidate. I mean, you were seeing in Florida all over the place you were seeing people come out for Sarah Palin. Like they were only bringing Sarah Palin to Florida. They weren't bringing McCain down at all. He was staying in the Northeast and other places. Barack Obama ended up winning Florida, but yeah, Sarah Palin was very influential. And I it might be controversial that I put her in A, but as far as the pick for what the ticket needed, yes, we can maybe look at the consequences of that pick, but you know, we're not looking at the future, we're looking at the past. Okay, Paul Ryan, to me, he was a C. And here's the problem I think that there is when it comes to these candidates. And I'm worried, will I be able to get enough room in that C category? He's one of the problems. So there's a point where you maybe don't want to have a candidate that's exactly like the presidential candidates. So if you have, and pardon how I say this, if you have two tightwad Republican business people that look like they're insurance salesmen whose sole job is to want to screw you out of money, that might not be like the best look. Okay. So I do believe that, yes, he was well known, speaker, all this kind of stuff. People knew who he was, but he was an exact carbon copy almost of Mitt Romney. And as I've mentioned in my campaign video, my live stream that I do, I think Mitt Romney did get a lot of BS against him. Like when he said the trees are just the right height in Michigan, or other things like that, the binder's full of women and other things. Some things not, like saying, yeah, we had a dog and we put the dog, the little dog cage on the top of the car when we're going. I don't know if that was true or not, but that was something that was going around. I think Romney did say it, but I do think Romney was treated kind of poorly in that campaign, and it was kind of BS. And if you ever watch the show The Newsroom, which I absolutely love, they hire someone who's kind of like a Republican consultant to be on there to give opinions. She even was saying, like, yeah, Romney's treated badly, the Democrats are doing. And in fairness, I think that's true. Ryan didn't bring anything ticket. They both just screamed, we're going to give tax cuts to the rich. They almost won. It was a close election, but by this time, and I would say by since 1996, partisanism really, really dug in. And the question becomes, at that point, do presidential candidates even matter from 2000 and on? I think they do. But yeah, I think Ryan just wasn't. Obama was seen as vulnerable, but I never thought he really was. Okay, I thought that he was going to win where he was going to win. So yeah, I thought Ryan was not the best choice. But then you kind of got to think, okay, if you're not going to pick, I mean, he should have just picked someone who was kind of an opposite, I think. So yeah, I didn't think it was a great choice. Now let's go to 2016. Now this is the part of doing these things that I hate, because then all of a sudden in the comment section after the live stream, all the myopic partisans will come in and say stuff. I just hate this part. Mike Pence, we're going to put him at a C. Oh, okay, good. It does do that. Because again, I mean, Donald Trump gets a nomination. Donald Trump doesn't expect to win. Mike Pence is expected to loses Indiana governor. So Mike Pence is like, well, might as well run for vice president. I'm not going to be reelected governor again. Why? Somebody just mentioned Huckabee for Paul Ryan. Yeah, that would have been like a good contrast there. But yeah, Mike Pence, yeah, he didn't hurt the ticket. He didn't bring anything to the ticket. He knew he was going to lose his Indiana governor. And so he just was like the one available. And a lot of people were just wanting to stay away. It's totally different from now. Stay away from Donald Trump because they thought that it would bring them down politically. So Mike Pence was the only one that had a statewide profile, who was actually well-known in the Senate, well-known in the House of Representatives as well, when he was there. So he did have a good profile, especially amongst. Well, you know what? I'm actually going to put him at B. Now you might be saying, because I all of a sudden hit something in my head, I'm like, no, we got to put him at B, because he was able to bring in the Christian conservatives that might have been really against Donald Trump. Now all of a sudden Donald Trump is like the Christian savior. I don't fucking get it. But yeah, it's like he brought in voters, certain voters that Donald Trump wouldn't have been able to get, I think, if he would have picked some sort of moderate to liberal guy. Okay. So I have to put Pence there because he did bring in those conservatives, religious voters, economic conservatives as well. It did give him true conservative Trump in his ticket, true conservative credentials. So I got to backtrack. I was like, he didn't contribute. He actually did, right? And that's the thing about this tier list. I can say, they can go here and then put them up there like I did with Benson. I was like, nah, he's S tier actually. So now I don't want to do this. No, I think we keep him in B tier because I still think Donald Trump won. I still think Donald Trump won in 2016 because the Democrats, as been a theme throughout this whole entire video, tried to coronate somebody else to be president, and it didn't work. Tim Kaine. Well, we will put him in C because he just didn't bring anything to the ticket. It was back to one of those, let's pick somebody from a key state. You notice how with the exception of Johnson, you notice how I haven't talked anything about winning a state. It's because, and this is, we'll get to it with 20 for 24. It's not a thing. It's just not a thing. Okay. And another thing too, I'm not talking necessarily about in all of these about who they should have picked, though I'm sure we'll talk about that in 2024. But with the situation when Kaine, he was nice. He knew how to speak well. He was just boring. I mean, really good, really good senator, had the credentials, was really nice, which I don't think you can be nice in this business. Really had a good package, but was just boring and didn't really bring anything to the ticket. Okay. Did Kaine, so you can't put him in the D tier. Like I said, that D tier is specifically for people who were detrimental to the campaign. We only have Curtis LeMay and Thomas Eagleton in there. But yeah, he just did not bring much. And so I have to put him in C. That's it. All right, Kamala Harris. Where do we put her? Now we're getting into the modern ones. 2000. I'm going to put her in the C category as well. Again, I don't think Kamala Harris necessarily benefited or hurt Joe Biden's election in 2020. The question becomes, could you have picked any of the 847 other Democratic candidates who are running for president to be your vice presidential candidate and still have the same results? And my answer is yes. So let's go over to Wikipedia really quick. 16, 20. Okay. Let's go. I'm sure they got the Democratic primary down here. Let's see if we can find the Democratic primary. Okay. Presidential primary election, Democratic Party. Okay. Let's look at okay. So he was going to pick Bernie. He could have picked Elizabeth Warren and maybe have done better with the left. Could have picked Pete Buttigieg. Okay. I mean, do I think any of those? And a lot of people say, he couldn't pick Pete Buttigieg because, he's gay or something like that. No, people are voting based on that issue. We're already voting for Trump anyway. Okay. So who else do we have? We had Michael Bloomberg. That would have been a bad one. Amy Klobuchar. He could have picked Tulsi Gabbard. Oh my God. He could have picked Amy Klobuchar, right? I think if he would have picked Amy Klobuchar instead of Kamala Harris, you still have the same results. You don't have anything that's necessarily different. So I say Kamala Harris didn't bring anything to the ticket. it was historic having her on there, being the first black female to be on a major party ticket and to then be elected to that position. But I truly believe there were a lot of other senators, a lot of other people that could have been picked. Okay, so that's the thing. All right. Now I'm doing these in a little bit of a different order. So I usually do the Democrat first and then the Republican second, but we're going with JD Vance. JD Vance, I'm going to put in C because again, I don't think JD Vance actually helped Trump expand what he had. And I don't think, and this is where we come to the point of really when it comes to Donald Trump, would it have really mattered who his vice presidential candidate was? Do we think that anyone picked him based on his vice presidential candidate? I don't think so. I mean, if he was planning on winning like Cletus in West Virginia, well, Cletus in West Virginia was already voting for Donald Trump anyway. So I don't see JD Vance as someone who really brought anything to the ticket. He was a new senator, so just elected, 2 years before. So, but he was a known author, but he could have picked anyone. He could have picked any governor or whatever. I think he picked JD Vance because Vance would be a yes man, which we find out that he is now. But I don't think that he was necessarily somebody that, brought anything. Okay, because I'm trying to think of, unlike Mike Pence, who Donald Trump was running in 2016, it was the first time he brought the Christian conservatives over. Christian conservatives were already on that side anyway. So I don't see what Vance brings. Because he didn't bring experience. He wasn't detrimental to the ticket, but he didn't bring any experience. He didn't bring any new voters. He, again, came from a state that Trump was probably going to win anyway, right? That's why I'm saying this whole pick him from a state thing just isn't a thing. It was like once Kennedy did it with LBJ, it was like all of a sudden now we talk about picking them from a region or state. It doesn't happen. It's just not a thing. So yeah, I don't see what Vance did. And then Tim Walz, I got to put him in C. As much as I like the guy, Tim Walz, I got to put him in a C. And I really, I think the problem with Walz is that, first of all, Josh Shapiro, people talk about him. He came across as like a whiny little kid. Okay, that shtick would have gotten really old really quick. And again, as we mentioned, people say, well, he's from Pennsylvania. Well, as we've gone through how many years of elections, starting in 1960, we have one guy from Texas. No one else wins or loses based on their state. So I think the Josh Shapiro myth is purely he'll win Pennsylvania. You have no proof. Okay. And people might say, well, polls were there. Well, polls said that Harris was going to win too. Look at the actual raw numbers. So I just want to poo-poo the Josh Shapiro thing. People who said he would have been the best. And honestly, his views on Israel, Kamala Harris already was losing votes based on Gaza and Israel. If you would have picked Josh Shapiro, who is very unapologetic on that issue, who's from a state that has a senator that's even more unapologetic on that issue, I think Shapiro would have actually lost you more votes than you had already lost. But Tim Walz, I liked him. I liked him a lot. The problem is that the campaign did not allow Tim Walz to be Tim Walz. Okay? When he was brought on board, he was like, I liked Mark Kelly and I was advocating for Mark Kelly early on, but I'm like, dude has no personality. You need to have some personality. Walz has personality. He has a really good personality. He is in touch with the average person. And this was where the problem was, right? They picked him to be this person, to be in touch with the average voter, but then they turned him into a politician. I mean, Walz said, hey, I've never used a teleprompter before, so I've got to learn now how to use a teleprompter. And I think the second they did that, they as soon as they made, because what happened then is you heard Walz on the campaign trail saying the exact same thing every time. They took away the strength that Walz could have had by pushing him into political mode. They made him focus on different things. They made him focus, early in the campaign, he was focusing on giving school lunches to children in schools in Minnesota. By the end of the campaign, he was talking about the football gay straight alliance that he put together. Bad messaging, especially in this election cycle in 2024. The Harris campaign ruined Walz. Okay. And then there is the question, and as much as I like him, I think, as much as I like Walz, I do have to say, because we mentioned the whole thing with the teleprompter and whatnot, though he was in Congress, he was in Washington, was he really the candidate that was prepared to be put on a national stage? I think so, but again, I think Kamala Harris used him the wrong way. They put him in they put him away. They didn't say anything about him. Then they brought him out and he was like a totally different person. So they screwed him up totally. But yeah, overall, there's just sometimes maybe somebody who's not ready for that level. And I think Walz was one of those people. Now, who would you have then picked? We can go into speculation. I don't know. There are a number that you could have picked. So it's funny. I'll do. So somebody mentioned Jen O'Malley screwed the whole team. By the way, I don't know if I have it on here. I don't have it on here. I do have now I'm getting into my political stuff. By the way, I'm not, so here's the thing. A lot of you are here for the history. I'm not doing I've made an executive decision to not do anything very recent. I did the video on 2010, and I'm not going to really do any elections that are from 2010 to now. Everything I'm going to do is basically going to be 2010 in the past, or maybe even like 2000 in the past. I do have another channel called Voting Trend that I do talk about current events, and I'm very, very much to one side, as most of you probably expect. But yeah, it's funny that somebody mentioned something about Jen O'Malley Dillon, because I actually wrote about Jen O'Malley Dillon on my Substack. And I'm trying to get to my Substack here. So I'll go ahead and put it in here. So this is my Substack that I do for political stuff. And let's see if so I did a lot of stuff about the Canadian election. But it's funny you talked about Jen O'Malley Dillon. Okay. Wow, I've written a lot more stuff. Here we go. Why this interview scared me. So it was about Jen O'Malley Dillon, and she was talking about how basically, we're winning this subgroup of voters here in this certain way and all that, and justifying it is kind of a win. So I wrote this whole entire article that this one interview scared me, and I explained the reason why. And this is 8 days before the election. And I was like, well, if you're saying this, you're making it sound like it's really good, but it's terrifying the hell out of me as somebody who wants his ticket to win. And I actually had one guy who was a subscriber to this, like some guy from Connecticut, actually gave money on my streams and my chats and all that. And he was saying, like, how dare you say this stuff? Like, this was a weird guy. He was like, he'd say, oh, you said something great. And then he said, I don't believe you said all this about Jen O'Malley Dillon. Take me off your list. And if you don't take me off your list, I'm going to, like, even though he was like he signed up for my list voluntarily and paid for a subscription. He was like, I'm gonna go after you in the courts and stuff like that. I was like, Jesus Christ, really? And it was like for this article that I wrote. And again, it proved to be right. So like, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of political stuff on here. Like I said, I'm very much to one side, because one of the things I had written about before I did a video about it, and it might just be a link to the video, was this myth about because I don't know if you remember. Oh yeah. So this is it. Seriously, Democrats, we need to talk. Why the Republicans for Harris movement is brainwashing Democratic voters, and it's worrying. So the reason why I wrote this was during the election, we were hearing, oh, all of these Republican voters are going to vote for Kamala Harris. I'm like, no, it's never happened. It's not going to happen. And guess what? Didn't happen. So if you want to join that, you can go there to Voting Trend. You can also Google search Voting Trend on on YouTube. But with that, we're done with the tier list for today. So I got a little political at the end just to promote the stuff I have and all that. But yeah, this is the tier list. I think a lot of people might be surprised me having a few of those people up there, but I do want to reiterate the D people are just people that like made the ticket go the other way, like negative. And there really have been very few. And the reason why I think there have been very few that have gone the other way is I think that maybe we in the political world, the history world and all that, put a little bit too much credence into the impact of a vice presidential candidate. I don't think that they're as strong as we think that they are. I don't think they're as influential as we think that they are. These S tier ones and these A tier ones are definitely influential. Okay. But the majority of them, they're good. They add a little bit, or as you can see, they were just there. They were just not much. They didn't add much to it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end the live stream. Like I said, I might take a break this week for making a video, but I might not. You never know. It's just doing all these videos, trying to do one every week. Man, it just makes your brain hurt. Like doing the research on that Utah video, because I had to go all the way back to the 1870s. And by the way, if you watch that Utah video, this is the book that I was talking about, the Politics of the West. I didn't have this cover on it, but it is. So this is where I got a lot of my Utah information right here. Very, very, very good book about Western politics. If many of you know V.O. Key's book about Southern politics, it's similar to, of a Western version of that done 20 years later or 19 years later. So this is the book that I used for my Utah video. All right. So with that, thank you all very much. Don't know if I'm going to do a live stream next week. I'm trying to think of another topic. I will be working probably today and tomorrow. I might have a video out next week, and it's going to be about the communist parties in in Poland. Hold on a second. In East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. So I don't think I'm going to do Yugoslavia. Wasn't part of the Eastern Bloc. I'm not going to do the Soviet Union now, because the Soviet Union would then break up into, 15 different republics. The whole idea of these videos is that the political party that was in control of the government, once that communist system collapsed, what happened to that political party? Did it have a pure successor? And what was that pure successor? How did that successor come about? And how has it performed electorally since then? So I'm going to be looking at those. So I'm not going to really be talking about the transition period or anything. It's just going to be within the context of the political parties themselves. So there won't be a lot about like the Treuhand in East Germany or any types of transition. It's just going to be about political parties, because this is election history, and we talk about political parties, campaigns, candidates, elections, and the likes, as I say in every video. So with that being the case, So, fact, Romania's communist president after the revolution just died a few days ago. So, yes, I saw that. So Ionesco or something like, yeah, I saw that. I saw that the other day. Like literally when I was writing the Romania part of the video, I saw that that was the case. Just a little bit of a hint. Romania is one of the countries that doesn't have a pure successor. So essentially when Nicolae Ceausescu was executed, and I've been to where he was executed in Romania, and I've made myself a promise that if this channel and my political channel get over 50,000 subscribers and the views are happening, I'm going to start my travel history channel, go into Romania and because Romania, there's a lot to show about the revolution in Romania that nobody ever shows. Like not just where Ceausescu was, killed, but other places there as well. So there's this one cemetery where many of the people of the revolution ended up being buried. There were certain battles. There were battles at the airport. There were battles at the television station. So one of the things, if you ever look into Romania, you'll see a lot of stuff from the television station. That was a big pivotal place of battle and propaganda and communication throughout the whole entire Romanian revolution. But Iliescu, that's his name, Ion Iliescu, right? But yeah, there was no pure successor. Essentially, whereas in East Germany, what happened was there was a party conference, an extraordinary party conference, where they created the SED and the PDS, which then eventually became the PDS, which eventually became the Linke. That is the actual progression of the parties. Same thing in Hungary. We got a progression. So I've only done Hungary, East Germany, and Romania, but there wasn't a progression. Okay, so when Nicolae Ceausescu died, that essentially ended the Communist Party. Any Communist parties that were born out of that were done separately. So it wasn't a party conference that then created a new party and did that. So there was no party conference. It just new parties were created. So the Romania part's going to be a little short because I want to say, okay, what are the actual linked successor parties? So that's what I'm going to be working on for the next video. I want to do my Sinn Féin video eventually. I've got some out there promised I haven't done, like the Fraser Whitlam battle between those two. I still need to do the Sinn Féin one. That thing is on 20,000 words. I'm going to have to just like take 2 weeks. I mean, that Sinn Féin one is like Sean Munger length video. But I am going to say some of these videos are going to be a lot shorter because doing 50-minute videos and all that research and all that, just my head wants to explode because it's just like digging into this stuff all day long. So yeah. So thank you all very much. I might do a live video next time. I do not know if I will. If you're watching this in the past or now, if you want to say thank you, you can do a super chat down here. Thank you all very much. If you do a super chat in the comments, I'll make sure to respond to that. Thank you all very much. I will see you in the next video whenever that comes out. And yeah, have a wonderful day. I'll see you then. And if you have any ideas for these live videos, which I don't want these live videos to be what I do on my regular channel, I want them separate, put them down below. Do you have an idea for a tier